The emergency lights flashed red in Jai-Yun's escape pod as it fell through the unknown moon's atmosphere. She held tight to her seat, her long ears pressed flat against her head in fear. The pod's metal walls groaned around her as it dropped faster and faster. Warning. Impact in 30 seconds, the computer said in its calm voice. Jai-Yun looked at her screen. The escape pod systems were failing one by one. She was lucky to get away from the battle in space, but now she faced a new problem. The moon below was covered in thick forests, and she had no way to control where she would land. 20 seconds to impact. Her hands shook as she checked her safety straps again. The young Sylphid engineer wished she had stayed on her home planet instead of taking this job in space. Her people were peaceful plant eaters who lived in harmony with nature. They weren't made for war or dangerous space missions. 10 seconds. Through the small window, she saw the tops of giant trees coming closer and closer. The ground rushed up to meet her. Jai-Yun closed her eyes and prayed to the nature spirits her people believed in. The crash was loud and violent. The pod hit the trees first, breaking through branches and tree trunks. It bounced off 2 thick trees before finally hitting the ground. The impact threw Jai-Yun against her straps so hard that she cried out in pain. When everything stopped moving, Jai-Yun opened her eyes slowly. Her head hurt, and she could feel a warm liquid running down her face. She touched it with shaking fingers and saw it was blood, her light green blood that marked her as a Sylphid. The pod's door was stuck, but Jai-Yun managed to kick it open after several tries. Fresh air rushed in, carrying the smell of plants and soil. On any other day, these smells would have made her happy. Her people loved nature and could even talk to plants. But right now, she was too scared to enjoy anything. Jai-Yun climbed out of the pod carefully. Her legs were weak, and her right arm hurt when she moved it. Looking around, she saw she had landed in a small clearing made by her crash. Broken trees and pieces of her pod were scattered everywhere. She pulled out her personal computer from her belt. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. Her heart sank when she saw there was no signal to call for help. She was stuck here, wherever here was. The computer beeped suddenly, showing her an alert. Jai-Yun's eyes went wide with fear as she read it. The message said that humans had been detected in this area recently. Humans, the omnivores who could eat both plants and meat. Her people had always feared them. Jai-Yun had seen pictures of humans in her studies. They had flat faces with forward-facing eyes like predators. Their teeth were sharp, good for tearing meat. Just thinking about them made her shiver. She needed to find a safe place to hide and wait for rescue. Her pod's emergency beacon was still working. Hopefully, her people would find her soon. But until then, she had to stay away from any humans. Jai-Yun checked her supplies. She had some emergency food packs, a basic medical kit, and a small tool set. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. She put everything in a bag and slung it over her shoulder, trying not to move her injured arm too much. The forest around her was quiet except for the sounds of strange birds and insects. The trees here were different from the ones on her home world, but at least they were trees. That gave her some comfort. Maybe she could even talk to them, once she felt safer. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, Jai-Yun knew she needed to find shelter. She couldn't stay near the crash site. It was too open, too easy to spot. With one last look at her broken pod, she started walking into the forest. She didn't know that someone had already noticed the crash. Someone who would change everything she thought she knew about humans. Hyun-Ki was recording notes about a new flowering plant when he saw the streak of light cross the sky. Through his binoculars, he watched the escape pod crash into the forest 3 kilometers from his research station. As a human xenobiologist studying life on this moon, he knew he had to help whoever was inside. He packed his medical kit, some food, and his research tools into his backpack. The sun was setting, but Hyun-Ki knew these forests well after 6 months of studying them. He grabbed his powered lantern and started walking toward the crash site. Meanwhile, Jia Yun had found a hollow at the base of a large tree. Her arm was getting worse, and she felt dizzy from her head injury. She tried to clean her wounds with the medical kit, but it was hard to do everything with one hand. The strange noises of the forest at night made her jump every few minutes. She heard something moving through the forest. Whatever it was big and getting closer. Jia Yun pressed herself deeper into the hollow, hoping the darkness would hide her. Her heart beat faster when she saw light from a lantern moving between the trees. Hyun-ki stepped into the small clearing where the pod had crashed. He studied the wreckage carefully, noting the green blood on the pilot's seat. "Hello," he called out softly. "I'm here to help. I'm a scientist from the research station." Jia Yun's breath caught in her throat when she saw him. The human was tall, with those scary forward-facing eyes that marked him as a predator. He carried a large pack that could hold weapons or, she shuddered, meat from his hunting. Even though he spoke gently, she remembered all the warnings about how humans could trick their prey. Hyun-ki noticed the trail of green blood drops leading away from the crash. He followed them slowly, not wanting to frighten the injured survivor. "I can see you're hurt," he said. "I have medical supplies. Better ones than the basic kit from your pod." Jia Yun watched him get closer to her hiding place. She could feel the tree she was hiding against trying to tell her something through the weak connection she had with plants on this moon. But she was too scared to focus on its message. When Hyun-ki was just a few meters away, a loud screech came from somewhere in the forest. Jia Yun knew that sound. It was like the warning call they had received about dangerous predators in this area. Without thinking, she burst from her hiding place and ran. "Wait," Hyun-ki called after her. "There are shadow stalkers in that direction. It's not safe." He knew the local predators were starting their nightly hunt. The injured sylphid was running straight into their hunting grounds. Jia Yun ran as fast as she could, ignoring the pain in her arm and head. She heard the human running behind her, calling out warnings, but she was sure he was just trying to catch her. Her people had stories about humans who would eat anything that moved. The forest got darker as she ran away from the human's lantern light. She couldn't see the tree roots anymore, and her injured arm threw off her balance. Jia Yun tripped and fell hard on the forest floor. When she tried to get up, she realized she was at the edge of a steep slope. Before she could move, she heard more screeches, closer this time. Red eyes glowed in the darkness around her. The shadow stalkers had found her, and now she was trapped between the predators of this moon and the human who was still following her. The last thing Jia Yun saw before panic took over was Hyun-ki's lantern light getting closer and the sound of him running toward her. She wasn't sure which was worse, the shadow stalkers or the human. Both were meat-eaters, after all. Both were dangerous. She didn't know that she had just made the worst and best mistake of her life at the same time. The shadow stalkers moved closer to Jia Yun, their red eyes glowing in the darkness. She could now see their black scales and long claws as they circled around her. There were 5 of them, each as big as she was. Her injured arm throbbed as she pressed herself against a tree trunk. Hyun-ki reached the edge of the slope just as the first shadow stalker leaped at Jia Yun. Without hesitation, he turned his lantern to its brightest setting and shone it directly at the creature. The shadow stalker screeched and backed away, its eyes sensitive to the bright light. "Run toward me," Hyun-ki shouted, pulling something from his pack. These creatures hate light and loud noises. Jia Yun looked at the human, then at the shadow stalkers. She had to choose between a known predator and an unknown one. Another shadow stalker jumped at her, and she made her decision. She ran toward Hyun-ki, her legs shaking with fear and exhaustion. As she reached him, Hyun-ki threw a small device on the ground. It exploded with a bright flash and a loud bang. The shadow stalkers scattered, shrieking in pain and surprise, but Hyun-ki knew they would return soon. "We need to get to higher ground," he said, keeping his voice calm. "They can't climb well, and the light from my research station will keep them away." He held out his hand to help her up the slope. Jia Yun stared at his hand. She noticed for the first time that he wore gloves and carried no weapons. His pack was full of scientific equipment, not hunting gear. Still, she didn't take his hand, choosing instead to climb up on her own. They moved through the forest quickly, with Hyun-ki keeping the lantern moving to scare away any following predators. Jae-yun's head was spinning, and her arm felt like it was on fire. She stumbled several times, but kept going. Behind them, the shadow stalkers followed at a distance, their red eyes appearing and disappearing between the trees. They were waiting for the light to go away, for their prey to tire or make a mistake. "The station is just ahead," Hyun-ki said, pointing to a faint glow through the trees. "We're almost there." Just then, Jae-yun's injured arm gave out as she was climbing over a fallen tree. She fell hard, crying out in pain. The shadow stalkers immediately moved closer, excited by the sound of injured prey. Hyun-ki turned back to help her, but Jae-yun crawled away from him. "Please," she said, her voice shaking. "Don't eat me." The human stopped, surprised. Then understanding dawned on his face. "Is that what you think? That I want to eat you?" He shook his head. "I'm a scientist. I study life on this moon. I don't hurt any living things unless I have to defend myself." A shadow stalker's screech interrupted them. The creatures were getting braver, moving closer despite the light. Hyun-ki looked at Jae-yun with concern in his eyes. "I know you're scared of me," he said, "but right now, you need help. Let me help you to the station. After that, you can decide if you want to trust me or not." Jae-yun looked into his eyes, those predator eyes that had scared her so much before. Now she saw something different in them: worry, care, and honesty. She nodded slowly and let him help her up. Together, they made their way to the station, the shadow stalker's cries fading behind them. As they walked, Jae-yun began to wonder if perhaps she had been wrong about humans. Maybe the stories her people told weren't the whole truth. The research station was smaller than Jae-yun expected. It was a simple building with bright lights around its perimeter that kept the shadow stalkers away. Inside, she saw walls lined with plant samples and scientific equipment. The sight of so many plants made her feel a little more at ease. Hyun-ki guided her to a chair and opened his medical kit. "Your arm needs treatment," he said, keeping his movements slow and careful. "May I look at it?" Jae-yun nodded, though she still watched him closely. Her arm had gotten worse during their run through the forest. The wound was deep, and her green blood had soaked through her sleeve. As Hyun-ki cleaned and bandaged her arm, Jae-yun noticed something strange. His research station had no meat storage, no hunting weapons, and no signs of animal products. Instead, she saw fresh fruits and vegetables in his small kitchen area. "You don't eat meat?" she asked, surprised. Hyun-ki smiled as he finished wrapping her arm. "I'm what humans call a vegetarian. Many of us choose not to eat animals. Even those who do eat meat usually get it from special farms, not from hunting." He walked to his kitchen and returned with 2 sealed packages. "These are emergency ration packs. They're made entirely from plants. Would you like some? You need to eat to regain your strength." Jae-yun's stomach growled at the mention of food. She hadn't eaten since before the crash. Carefully, she opened one of the packages and smelled it. The food inside was similar to what she ate at home. As they ate, Hyun-ki showed her his research notes on his computer. There were detailed drawings of local plants, climate data, and even notes about the shadow stalkers. "I'm trying to understand how all the life forms here connect to each other," he explained. "Every plant and animal has its place in nature's balance." Jae-yun realized she understood this idea well. Her people believed the same thing about their home world. She looked at Hyun-ki with new eyes. Perhaps humans were not as different from her people as she had thought. Suddenly, they heard scratching sounds outside. The shadow stalkers had followed them to the station. Through the windows, Jae-yun could see their red eyes moving in the darkness beyond the lights. "They're persistent," Hyun-ki said, checking the station's security systems, "but they can't get past the lights. We're safe here." Jae-yun watched him work. His movements were precise and careful, like when he had treated her arm. She thought about how he had come to help her without knowing what she was, how he had saved her from the shadow stalkers, and how he had not once tried to harm her. "I'm sorry I ran from you," she said quietly. "My people have always feared humans because you can eat meat. We thought that meant you would eat us too." Hyun-ki sat down across from her. "Fear often comes from not understanding each other," he said. "Humans can eat many things, but we have strict rules about respecting other thinking beings. We would never harm your people." As the night grew deeper, Jae-yun felt safer than she had since the crash. The shadow stalkers eventually gave up and left, their screeches fading into the forest. Inside the station, surrounded by plants and scientific equipment, she began to understand that sometimes the most dangerous thing was not other species, but the fear that kept them apart. Morning came to the research station with golden light filtering through the trees. Jae-yun woke up on a small cot that Hyun-ki had prepared for her. Her arm felt better after the treatment, though it still needed time to heal completely. She found Hyun-ki outside the station, carefully examining a patch of glowing flowers. He was recording notes about them in his computer while taking samples with great care not to harm the plants. Jae-yun watched as he gently touched the petals, measuring their response to light. "These flowers are remarkable," Hyun-ki said when he noticed her. "They store sunlight during the day and release it at night to attract helpful insects. Would you like to see how they work?" Jae-yun moved closer, her natural curiosity about plants overtaking her remaining fear. She placed her hand near one of the flowers, using her people's ability to sense plant life. The flower responded to her touch, its glow brightening slightly. "Amazing," Hyun-ki said, recording the reaction. "Your connection with plants is fascinating. We humans have studied plants for thousands of years, but we can't communicate with them like your people can." They spent the morning examining different plants around the station. Jae-yun found herself sharing knowledge about similar species from her home world, while Hyun-ki explained how these plants had adapted to life on the moon. When they stopped for lunch, Hyun-ki showed her his food garden. He grew many kinds of vegetables and fruits in special containers designed for the moon's gravity. "I prefer to grow my own food," he explained. "It helps me understand the plants better, and it means I don't have to rely on supply shipments." Jae-yun helped him harvest some fresh vegetables for their meal. As they worked together, she noticed how careful he was with each plant, taking only what was needed and making sure not to damage the rest. "I don't understand," she said as they prepared the food. "If humans can eat meat, why do you choose to live this way?" Hyun-ki thought carefully before answering. "Humans have the ability to eat many things, but we also have the ability to choose what we eat. Many of us believe that just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. We can choose to live in ways that cause less harm." Later, they visited Hyun-ki's research sites in the safe area around the station. He showed her how he tracked the growth of native plants and studied their relationships with local animals. Jae-yun was surprised to see that even the smallest creatures had a place in his research. "Every living thing matters," Hyun-ki explained as they watched a tiny flying insect pollinate a flower. "The more we understand how life works together, the better we can protect it. That's what being a scientist means to me." As the day went on, Jae-yun realized something important. She had always thought of humans as dangerous because they could eat meat, but now she saw that the same trait that made them omnivores, their ability to adapt and choose, also gave them the power to be kind and thoughtful. When evening came, they sat at the station's observation window, watching the glowing flowers begin their nightly display. Jae-yun felt different than she had the day before. The human she had feared was now teaching her new things about plants, the very things her people held most sacred. Perhaps, she thought, being able to understand both plants and animals makes humans better at seeing how all life connects together. It was a new way of thinking about humans, one that had never occurred to her before. The next day brought heavy rain to the forest moon. Inside the research station, Jae-yun and Hyun-ki used the time to share stories about their worlds. Jia-yun sat comfortably in a chair, her injured arm healing well, while Hyun-ki prepared hot drinks from local herbs he had collected. "Tell me about your home," Hyun-ki said as he handed her a steaming cup. "I have read about sylphid culture, but I would like to learn more from someone who lives it." Jia-yun took a careful sip of the drink. It reminded her of home. "My people live in cities grown from living trees," she explained. "We shape them as they grow, talking to them through our plant connection. It takes many years, but the trees are happy to help us build our homes." Hyun-ki typed notes on his computer as she spoke. "That sounds wonderful. Humans have tried to make living buildings too, but we can't communicate with plants like you can. We have to use science to understand what they need." "What about human cities?" Jia-yun asked. "Are they all full of meat markets and hunting grounds?" She blushed, realizing how her question showed her old prejudices. But Hyun-ki smiled kindly. "Most human cities have many gardens and parks. We have restaurants for all types of food choices. Many humans never eat meat at all. Those who do usually get it from special farms, not from hunting. We have strict laws about treating all animals with respect." Thunder rolled outside as they continued talking. Jia-yun learned that humans had thousands of different cultures, each with their own food traditions. Some human groups had lived as vegetarians for thousands of years. Others ate meat, but had careful rules about how to do it respectfully. "The first human explorers were often hunters," Hyun-ki explained. "That's probably why some species think we're all dangerous. But most humans today are more interested in learning about other life forms than hunting them." Jia-yun thought about this. "On my world, we teach children that humans are scary because you have sharp teeth and forward-facing eyes like predators. But we never learned about your different cultures or choices. Fear often comes from what we don't understand," Hyun-ki said. He showed her pictures on his computer of human cities with their gardens, scientists studying plants, and people working to protect endangered species. As the rain continued falling, they shared more stories. Jia-yun told him about sylphid festivals, where they sang to make plants grow. Hyun-ki described human efforts to save forests and protect natural spaces on Earth. "Maybe," Jia-yun said thoughtfully, "humans understand nature better because you can see both sides, the plants and the animals. You know how everything needs to work together." Hyun-ki nodded. "That's what I love about being a scientist. Every day I learn more about how all living things are connected. Even species that seem very different can help each other survive." The rain began to ease as evening approached. Jia-yun realized she no longer felt afraid of the human scientist. Instead, she felt grateful that her crash had led her to meet someone who could teach her so much about looking past surface differences. "When my people come to rescue me," she said, "I will tell them the truth about humans. We have been wrong to judge you only by what you can eat, not by what you choose to do." The emergency beacon from Jia-yun's escape pod had been sending its signal for 3 days when the sylphid rescue ship arrived. Jia-yun and Hyun-ki first noticed it as a bright light in the morning sky, growing larger as it descended through the atmosphere. "That's a sylphid ship," Jia-yun said, recognizing the leaf-shaped design. She stood outside the research station with Hyun-ki, her arm almost fully healed thanks to his care. "But I'm worried about how they will react when they see you." Hyun-ki understood her concern. "Should I stay inside the station?" he asked, ready to hide if it would make things easier. Jia-yun shook her head. "No. It's time my people learned the truth about humans. You saved my life. They need to know that." The rescue ship landed in a clearing near the station. 4 sylphid soldiers emerged, their plant fiber armor glowing with defensive energy. When they saw Hyun-ki standing next to Jia-yun, they immediately raised their weapons. "Step away from the human," the lead soldier called out. "Engineer Jia-yun, are you hurt? Did it try to eat you?" "Stop." Jia-yun moved to stand between the soldiers and Hyun-ki. "He saved my life. The human is a friend." The soldiers looked confused. Their training had taught them that humans were dangerous predators. Seeing one of their own people defending a human went against everything they believed. "This is Hyun-ki," Jai-yun explained. He's a scientist who studies plants. When I crashed, he helped me. When dangerous animals attacked me, he protected me. He has shown me that everything we thought we knew about humans was wrong. The lead soldier stepped forward, still suspicious. But humans are meat eaters. They have predator eyes and sharp teeth. All our records show they are dangerous. Look around you, Jai-yun said, gesturing to the research station and its gardens. Do you see any signs of hunting? Any weapons? Hyun-ki grows his own food, studies plants, and helps protect the forest. He can eat meat, yes, but he chooses not to. Humans have the ability to choose what they eat and how they live. Hyun-ki spoke up, keeping his voice calm and gentle. I understand your fear, but my people have learned that the ability to eat both plants and animals helps us understand how all life connects together. We use this knowledge to protect nature, not destroy it. The soldiers lowered their weapons slowly as they looked around. They saw the careful gardens, the scientific equipment, and the complete lack of hunting gear. Most importantly, they saw how Jai-yun stood confidently beside the human, showing no fear. Engineer Jai-yun, the lead soldier said, is this really true? Can humans be trusted? I was as afraid as you are when I first crashed here, Jai-yun replied. But living with Hyun-ki has taught me that judging any species only by what they can do, rather than what they choose to do, is a mistake. Some of our most important beliefs are about understanding and respecting nature. Shouldn't we extend that respect to other thinking beings too? The soldiers looked at each other, then at their leader. Slowly, the lead soldier lowered his weapon completely and stepped forward with an open hand, copying the human greeting gesture he had learned about in his training. Perhaps, he said to Hyun-ki, it is time for our peoples to learn more about each other. 1 year after Jai-yun's crash on the forest moon, the research station had grown into something remarkable. What was once a simple building had become a joint human-sylphid research center, with gardens and laboratories where scientists from both species worked together. Jai-yun stood in the main research garden, watching Hyun-ki teach a group of young sylphid scientists about the moon's unique plant life. Her former rescuers had spread the word about what they had learned, and now many sylphids wanted to study alongside humans. The most important thing to remember, Hyun-ki was saying, is that every living thing has its place in nature's balance. Even the shadow stalkers, which seem frightening, help keep the forest healthy by controlling other animal populations. The sylphid students nodded, taking notes. None of them showed any fear of their human teacher. Thanks to Jai-yun's story, which had spread across sylphid space, old prejudices were finally changing. Who would like to demonstrate their plant communication skills? Hyun-ki asked. Several students raised their hands eagerly. Remember to record what the plants tell you. This helps us combine sylphid abilities with human scientific methods. Jai-yun smiled as she watched. Her own role had grown too. She now led the engineering team that maintained the research center, but she also helped teach other sylphids about humans. Her experience had made her the perfect person to help others overcome their fears. The research center had made many important discoveries. By combining human scientific knowledge with sylphid plant communication abilities, they had learned new ways to grow food, heal sick plants, and protect endangered species. Their work was changing how both species thought about nature. Engineer Jai-yun, a voice called. She turned to see one of the human scientists approaching with a communication device. There's a message for you from the Galactic Science Council. Jai-yun took the device and read the message. Her eyes widened with excitement. They want to use our research center as a model for other worlds, she told Hyun-ki when he joined her. They say our work here shows how different species can work together and learn from each other. We've come a long way from when you thought I was going to eat you, Hyun-ki said with a gentle smile. They often joked about their first meeting now, though they never forgot its important lesson. That evening, they held a celebration in the center's main hall. Humans and sylphids sat together, sharing vegetarian foods from both their worlds. Looking around, Jai Yun saw humans learning sylphid plant songs, while sylphids studied human scientific equipment with fascination. Sometimes the best discoveries come from accidents, she said in her speech to the gathered scientists. When I crashed on this moon, I thought I had found danger. Instead, I found understanding. I learned that what makes us different can also make us stronger when we work together. After the celebration, Jai Yun and Hyun Ki stood in the garden, watching the glowing flowers that had first helped them begin to understand each other. The research center's lights kept the shadow stalkers away, but sometimes they could hear the creatures calling in the distance. What do you think the future holds? Hyun Ki asked, looking up at the stars. Jai Yun touched one of the glowing flowers, feeling its happiness through her plant connection. I think we've shown that fear can turn into friendship when we take time to understand each other. That's just the beginning of what we can achieve together. High above them, another ship was landing, bringing new scientists eager to learn. The story of the sylphid engineer who learned to trust a human had opened a door that would never close again.